Welcome guys, gals, and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys.
You may not have heard that, but Booker just like absolutely yeets himself out of the room.
Yeah, in legitimate fear because we're here on Buffy Boys. I've genuinely forgotten the intro otherwise. Welcome guys, gals, and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joel. I'm one of your hosts, and with me as always is your other tenor co-host.
Oh, absolutely not.
What do you think you are? Say your name.
Brian, hi. Well, definitely not a tenor. Oh, what's the other one? It's a tenor, bass.
Going down is tenor, baritone, bass.
Oh, geez. Okay, probably tenor then, yeah.
And then,
but you see, the thing is, I can't sing any range very well.
True. So as you may have guessed from my pitch perfect intro lines, we are doing the musical episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer this week, Once More with Feeling, season 6, episode 7. So it'll be one of our event episodes as well, and accordingly we'll be eschewing the bronze banter for this week. So Brian, do you want to drop us straight into the overture there with a little bit of a Buffy summary?
Sure. So this episode was first aired on November 6th, 2001. It was written and directed by Joss Whedon, who last wrote and directed The Gift. And here's your Buffy summary. Sunnydale becomes a musical. Demon Sweet, who causes this, makes people dance themselves to death. Tara discovers Willow's spell and is furious. Giles decides he is protecting Buffy from reality and should leave. Dawn's theft of a talisman convinces Sweet that she summoned him and is destined to be his demon queen. Buffy confronts him and nearly dances herself to death until prevented by Spike. In a song, she reveals she was in heaven. Xander summons Sweet. Sweet passes on abducting him. Spike and Buffy kiss.
Quite extensive.
Yeah, a lot happens.
Yeah. So what I thought we might start off with is Brian, what is your history with musicals? We talked about
literally that I was going to ask you as well.
Yeah.
Like what? Yeah. So I really like musicals. So yeah, I suppose when I was a teenager, I would have been super into musicals. But you know, the cool musicals. So I mean, as every teenager is, I was obsessed with Rent and those kids who just feel like they do not have to pay their rent. / clearly people in their 40s. And then yeah, I would have gotten. I remember for a while I spent a lot of time on like Broadway blogs and forums and stuff, swapping bootleg recordings of musicals, which I really liked. It was really good fun. So I really like I probably my favorite. If I had to choose a favorite musical, like I'd probably be lying if I said it wasn't Hamilton, because Hamilton is just incredible. But apart from that stuff like Wild Party or 25th annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, or the title of show I really like, Bear Pop Opera, fucking love that shit back in the day.
Yeah.
It was really gay. I'm trying to think what else. But yeah, no, so I can't sing very well, but I do quite like a good musical, depending on the situation. I think there are a lot of musicals which are absolute trash.
True.
But like a well done one I find very, very fascinating. How about you? What's your you would have performed a lot of musicals? Yeah,
I think I have an interesting approach to it in the sense that, as we've discussed many times on the show, I have no actual musicality as a person. You know, I don't understand music. I can't really perform anything in a musical context. And yet I have quite an extensive history with musicals. I'm trying to think where that would have started from. I don't know if it's just from like Muppet style musicals or musical episodes of things, or things like Little Shop of Horrors, which is like, yes, it's a musical but it has a sci-fi bent, etc. I have to wonder if one of the earliest musicals I was into and was introduced to was this episode. I was Once More Feeling, because as I mentioned before, I think Once More Feeling was the very first CD I ever bought.
Pretty cool.
Which would and at the time that would insinuate I was probably about 11 or 12 at the time, and really did not own many CDs for a very long period of time after that. So this might actually be it for me. But from that, yeah, so I as I mentioned before, I went to a school which had a prolific, a swollen theatre department, and we did really like objectively professional scale productions of things like Sweeney Todd, Les Miserables, Jesus Christ Superstar
Did you do Jesus Christ Superstar?
It wasn't it wasn't in my rotation, but they did do it while I was in school. It might have actually been the first one I went to cool. For school. So yeah, all the we were able to do all that on like genuinely like massive professional scale, and then being with all the cool theatre kids, everyone was really into Rent, and I went through a period where people would be singing lyrics at each other just randomly, being really random, going down the street, that kind of thing.
Love that shit.
Yeah.
Oh, Spring Awakening. I love Spring Awakening.
And then I would just say, I think following that, having been with you, you've introduced me to a lot of good musicals as well, or in sense like stuff that isn't just like the most mainstream top billing, like things like Wild Party I love as well, and all that as well.
I think I introduced you to Hamilton initially as well, potentially,
but potentially you might have mentioned to me first, but I would have found out about Hamilton otherwise.
I would hope think so.
One of my adjacent memories of that is a podcast that people may be familiar with, which my brother and me, which I listened to the whole back catalogue of from 2010 onwards when I got into it, and I remember them being like, hey, we have this friend who's just really into like theatre, he's really trying up and coming, Lin-Manuel Miranda, he has this new show coming out soon, Hamilton, we think it might be big, you should check it out. And that was like completely like genuine. It's
so funny as well, because like I remember Lin-Manuel Miranda at the time, I was like very much like, oh great, this guy is like doing another thing, because I had listened to In the Heights back in the day, which was his first musical, and I thought it was total shit. So I was like, oh, this is going to be absolute rubbish. But Hamilton, like, so many bangers, and it's genuinely emotional. I've cried watching Hamilton multiple times. I've cried listening to Hamilton. Yeah, which is not a good sign.
So going into this, Once More Feeling being something that like I definitely know incredibly well, and I think you can attest that while we were watching the episode, like the most obscure inane lyrics I kind of knew off the cuff. And we also have a Once More Feeling poster in our spare bedroom as well in your office, so it's
my siblings actually last year for my birthday got me Once More Feeling on vinyl, which is very cool. I would say that I think of the brilliant episodes of Buffy, this is the one I probably know the least. I probably would know Restless, The Body, etc. better. That being said, I've probably seen this probably 8 or 9 times at this point. We went to see it one time, screening of it in 2012, I want to say, for our friend Emma's birthday, who's a listener of the podcast. So hi, Emma. That was great fun. You dressed up as Giles. I dressed up as Brian. And afterwards we got pizza, which I was very excited about. But I think we've referenced that a couple of times, because I remember like part of the watch along, or the kind of the midnight screening process of Once More Feeling, when that was a thing, because it's no longer a thing apparently. You can't get the rights to it anymore. Though I seriously doubt this place had gotten the rights.
Right, Jesus.
I think it was, what was it
the
called?
Sugar Club?
But it was Buffy. It was like a Buffy. I can't remember what it was called. The people there were kind of awful. But anyway, the part of the midnight screening like culture of it is that people shout at the stage like "Shut up, Dawn" whenever she appears on stage or on screen and stuff like this. And I remember finding that just so like toxic and unnecessary.
Yeah, but come on, that's like a massive holdover from Rocky Horror as well, where it's like you're literally like calling like Janet a slut and stuff like that.
That is funny though.
Yeah,
I love actually Rocky Horror. That's a huge formative musical.
Oh yeah. Again, Rocky Horror being one that like I think I probably watched and everyone watches super early, and like people who aren't into musicals weirdly have seen Rocky Horror, and it's like an incredibly gay, sexy musical kind of thing. It's a weird one of that. It's like it's definitely, the time warp is one of these things where it's like, how could this get adopted into heterosexual wedding culture?
I'm not even sure if it is part of heterosexual wedding culture outside of Ireland. I think that's
maybe
yeah, like remember in Dairy Girls when they do Rock the Boat, and like audiences everywhere were like, what the fuck is happening? And it's like, yeah, that's the thing that happens constantly.
Like I think when Irish people
learn a dance, they just like never forget it. They're just like, we're never letting go of this.
We love a memorable dance sequence, but also I think when we speak about weddings and wedding playlists and wedding DJs, we do mean this like eclectic mixtape of like YMCA and Macarena, Dancing Queen, all this kind of stuff, which actually might be more Irish centric than I thought it was.
Yes, I think so too. But yeah, so we watched that and it was really good fun actually. And yeah, I would say just I probably don't know this episode as well as most Buffy hardcore fans. I think I'm a Buffy hardcore fan at this point.
I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
We were having a conversation the other day where you're like, is Buffy my number one show of all time? I was like, for the hours you put into it, I would fucking hope so. Yeah.
No, I put together my top 10 list of TV shows, my favorite ones. And Buffy did end up number one. And I'm pretty comfortable with that, in the sense that I think that, like, when we went to this podcast, the whole idea was that we were showing, like, we were exploring the literary depths of what Buffy has to offer, and
heights, Brian.
Huh?
And heights.
And we were exploring the kind of critical worth of the show and the brilliance and how it plays with television formats, which this episode is brilliant at. And I think that's really borne out. Anyway, yeah, so that's kind of my experience with musicals. And unlike Joel, I can't sing very well, but I have a pretty musical background. I would have been made to play. Well, no, I played a lot of piano growing up, and I can kind of play most instruments. There are very few instruments that you put in my hands I won't be able to play within an hour or two. I can play the trombone and the bagpipes. Those ones are weird ones.
Obscure.
Yeah. Oh, actually, yeah, I wanted to say, one of the things that is odd is that I realized this week, I was like, oh, this is so weird. My book, which is one of my favorite books for talking about Buffy, which is Fighting the Forces, What's at Stake in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is edited by Rhonda Wilcox and David Lavery. It's a great collection of essays. I'd highly recommend going out and picking it up and just reading it cover to cover. It's worthwhile. But I was like, why have I not found any references to it, to Once More Feeling in it? And I was like, that's so weird. And I realized that actually it only goes up as far as season 5. So I was like, oh, that's sad, because it means that this is the kind of the goodbye to Fighting the Forces for this podcast. And it's been a great source. Thank you so much for publishing it, the people who published it, and the people who wrote the essays in it. Been invaluable, and I thoroughly recommend it. And additionally, this episode marks the final episode of Buffy for which Rhonda Wilcox, who wrote Why Buffy Matters, The Art of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which I think is probably one of the best single text books about Buffy, where it's not a collection of essays, it is a collection of essays, but it's her own essays. I think it's probably the best one I've read, and I disagree with her a lot of points, and there's a lot of like tension in Buffy studies where a lot of it is being like, oh, here's why Buffy is worthy of study, and it's like, this all would have been so much better if you just stepped beyond that and be like, it's worthy of study, I'm studying it.
Made the assumption of it. Yeah.
Exactly. So they're always trying to make a case for Buffy as literary text. Anyway, but this one, it's great, but she writes, I've said this before, she writes 6 essays about different episodes, focusing in on that specific episode. So she did Surprise Innocence, I don't know if she did Bargaining, or Becoming, I don't think she did Becoming. The Zeppo, Hush, Restless, The Body, and now Once More Feeling. But this is the final essay in the book, so it's kind of going to be the last time that I heavily reference it. So I thoroughly recommend this book as well. It's easy to pick up on Amazon. Go, if you're interested in Buffy studies at all, definitely worth a read. It's like 200 pages long. You'll read it in a weekend. Unless you're me, it'll take you 2 weeks.
Several years in one interpretation.
What was that?
Because you've been reading it over such a long period of time. Yeah.
Well, I read it all, the whole thing in one sitting at one point. Well, not in one sitting, but like in one space of a week at one point. Anyway, that's the end of Brian's book club for the week. Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk to you about just the structure of this episode. So there are a couple of bizarre structural stuff here. I like Rhonda Wilcox writes extensively about this, but the structural oddities of this episode were broadcast or were communicated to the audience well ahead of time. So a lot of the promo of the episode, the promo videos and stuff that UPN. Yeah, UPN, is that right?
That's plausible,
yeah. We're broadcasting for this. We're the cast preparing and singing in sound booths and stuff to get ready for this. And there's additionally there's a couple of different ways in which this episode denotes itself as being structurally unusual. For one thing, it's the longest episode of Buffy. It's an hour, and it would have broadcast for an hour and 8 minutes, so it's about 48 to 50 minutes long, which then got edited down for various reshowings of it, which I think is probably an awful idea. And then the opening, after you have the previously on, instead of having the standard credit sequence, you instead have a 40s to 60s Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer kind of title credit scene where you just show pictures of the characters and their faces and their names, basically.
Yeah, like a Bewitched style thing or something.
Very Bewitched, exactly. And then kind of quite quickly going into this kind of dreamy music. So that's really fascinating, because Rhonda Wilcox writes that it's preparing the preparing the audience for an experience in which, while it is firmly set in the kind of confines of what is happening for our characters, because there's no way of presenting a musical which is in the kind of I want to say like narratologically objective way that Buffy tends to. So Buffy as a show, while it has moments of free and direct discourse and kind of stream of consciousness in the way it portrays its like camera movements, its choice of what we're looking at, it rarely really tries to influence the viewer through those things, or if it does, it's very, very like whenever you point a camera at something, you are choosing what you're showing, and when you start pressing play on something, when you edit something, there's choices in every way, but there's ways to be very verbal about that, and there are ways to be very quiet about that. To this point, Buffy's been quite quiet about that, and in this episode that breaks entirely. So
I think there's a certain assumption here that to make this work, or to get the buy-in necessary to make it worthwhile as an episode, in addition to kind of an event, it needs to acknowledge that it's being observed.
Yes.
You know, they're trying to short circuit any of this strangeness because they only have such a short period of time to do it. And I think what this episode sets out to do, which is part of what we'll discuss here, is it really tries to make certain it still works as an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which I think is really crucial.
That's it. That's exactly what I'm trying to say, is that they are trying to like really thread a fine line, walk a fine line.
Walk a fine line, thread, yeah. Yeah,
thread the needle here by having this be like very acceptable as a Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode and induct its audience very quickly into the bizarre formatting of it. So that opening credits, the fact that you were setting aside more time for this episode, the fact that you were seeing promo clips for it that were like the actors out of character, and then during the episode you get a couple of just like very clear breaks, like as in just sometimes you feel like there are parts where you feel like you're seeing actors in these roles more so than any other episode of Buffy.
Yeah.
So we noted a couple of things. One is Nicholas Brendan towards the end of I'll Never Tell, when at one point Emma Caulfield looks directly at the camera and Nicholas Brendan is looking just slightly off, and we were like, he looked at the wrong camera there, and they couldn't reshoot it because it was so extensive and etc. And then at another point, Amber Benson accidentally walks into a pole during... It is
incredible.
Yeah. During... what's that song called, actually?
Oh, it's Give Me Something to Sing About, I think. Or,
okay.
Yeah. But basically the finale song where Buffy's about to burn up, and you can 100% see just out of frame of camera when Amber Benson steps back into place, she walks directly into a gurgle and then tries to like play it off. And
like she's clearly corpsing extensively. By the way, very importantly, Amber Benson in this episode, by far the star. Like she is the revelation of the episode, and you kind of get a sense of, oh, this is what Tara's character could have been through this, where she's fun, flirty, like a little goofy in a way that she never gets to be. And it's actually very, very charming. Like,
I think Amber Benson is quite like a goofy, like energetic, person.
Yeah.
And as we said, Tara is like a very likable, very good character, but she's always meant to be presented a slightly lower energy or slightly more restrained than the main cast.
Yeah, and I'm aware of the misogynistic implications of this word, but I think a lot of people would describe her as a little dumpy in Buffy at times. You know.
Jesus Christ.
No,
I'm not saying that to you, but it's like, I can see that people would say that, but like, God, it's just like, imagine having that kind of thought process about it, you know.
But and she's also just like incredible in this episode because she's by far the best singer who's not Giles who's not Anthony Head or James Marsters.
James Marston is Cyclops.
Yeah, who are both like already trained professional singers. So you get a couple of, and then at another point, Anya refers to like it felt like there were people watching us while we were performing, almost like there was a fourth wall in our house that they were looking through, which is of course breaking the fourth wall. So you get this kind of it denotes itself very specifically, and it works for it because it does a very effective job of inducting the viewer into thinking, I'm watching an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but it's not a normal one. And I want to eschew my my expectations here and wait to see what happens, I think.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think it's an interesting hybrid of, I suppose something to speak about here is that this episode, well, definitely not the first musical episode of television, is definitely one of the earlier ones of our era of television.
I would say by far the most successful.
By far the most successful. It has been supposed, and Joss Whedon has denied that he thinks this influence is accurate, but that it presaged things like Glee.
Yeah.
Joss Whedon said that he thought High School Musical and the popularity of that much more informed things like Glee, but it definitely normalized a certain kind of event television, and like it's so easy, it's so prolific to do these kind of things now. By the time this was a very, very unusual thing to happen, and it's quite restrained in compared to like what might come out for, I don't know, like, you know, an episode of The Simpsons next week or something.
Yeah.
You know, but at the time, I think it was quite significant, and where it does stand apart, I think, from other event television in that same way, is it really does try to do it in the style of the show and retain the authenticity of the show, and in that way, it's not a fully cohesive musical insofar as like it's more of a variety show of songs. Like none of the styles that they use. I know that obviously within shows you can have bigger or smaller numbers, but like it's a medley. It
definitely is a medley of songs. Like there, you go from the kind of the pop ballad in Under Your Spell. You have kind of like a 80s hair metal acoustic number for Spike, and very clearly like influenced by, as you pointed out, something like Jesus Christ Superstar. And then you have like, you know, your acoustic emotional moment for Giles. Very clear Roger and Hammerstein influenced a number like kind of Fred and Ginger number for Xander and Anya, and for Buffy at the beginning, like the opening scene very clearly like structured around kind of like an opening for Beauty and the Beast or Little Mermaid. What's the one for Beauty and the Beast? I know every line of it, but I don't know what the name of the song is. Anyway, so yes, definitely it's definitely not a cohesive musical, and I think actually very interestingly, I think additionally to that, it's very. I think it works so much better than most musical episodes or something like this. And I think, I'm not sure if you mentioned there, but it's thought to have been this episode very much influenced by the Xena musical episode.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, I can definitely see that.
Yeah.
There is a television show which did a lot of effective like concept episodes without sacrificing the story.
Totally agree. Apparently it was the episode called The Bittersweet, SUITE, and it was aired in 1998 of Xena.
The Wikipedia entry for it claims that it started a trend of non-musical live action shows doing at least one musical episode, which is like quite a bold claim, but
yeah.
There's some definitely similarities in style, I think, in the DNA between Xena and Buffy.
Yeah. I think Xena walked so Buffy could run in lots of ways. Very important to note here as well, in terms of structure breaking stuff, is this is the only episode that was aired in letterbox format, which we didn't really note because we basically since season 4 in the DVDs box sets that we have, they've been all letterbox anyway. Because it was shot in letterbox, and it means that there's absolutely no creeping in cameramen in this episode for us, which was good. But yeah, and I think in terms of the content, very different to your standard musical, because the core thing here is that Buffy it's not, you get a musical in a narrative structure when a person is starting their journey, finding their feet, winning, and then coming back. This is very much in the part where Buffy has returned to Middle Earth. No, returned to Hobbiton, you know, and she is now has no purpose.
Hobbiton is so much more specific than what I expected you could say, which was the Shire, so I'm impressed.
Oh, okay, thank you. So, and she's the point of this episode for Buffy is that she's incredibly depressed. She's experiencing a deep depression and numbness, and it's fascinating because I think a lot of people sing a lot of the lyrics for this episode without really thinking about the content of what Buffy's communicating, which is that like everything she's communicating is like, you know, life is a stage, and you know, life is a play. It's that kind of Macbeth thing of like life is a play and we're all characters, whatever it is.
We all play our part.
Yeah. And there's, which is like a deeply existential and nihilistic. Well, they're kind of two different things. It's a deeply existential piece of writing. And I think this episode is very existential. Buffy's questioning what's the point in anything.
Yeah.
And the existential question at the end of the episode is like, life is not a song. What's the point, basically? Like, I need something to actually care about. I have nothing that is driving me forward. And Spike's response is like the very classic existential response, which is you get better at this through doing it and finding things to care about, and the existence preceding essence, and attaching significance and meaning to things through action and decision. So I mean, that is not the typical communication of a musical, but what it does do in terms of, like, I mean, that's point A, and then point B, which is the conflicting point, is that musicals are used to convey your innermost thoughts. It's the best structure for characters trying to say, here's how I really feel in a completely unvarnished way to the, well, not unvarnished, unfiltered way to the audience. And this does that so well. The whole thing is about how uncomfortable it is speaking a truth at a point in the season when no one is communicating.
Yeah.
It's very much like Hush, where Hush, you took away all the voices because no one could communicate, and suddenly they're able to communicate much better. In this episode, you take away everyone's inability to lie and to miscommunicate, and you have something that's much more honest.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely correct there, and it inverts a lot of the impetus of a musical, insofar as a song in a musical is meant to, at the very least, denote progression, resolution, revelation, realization, all this kind of stuff. There's no song in this which really gets anyone anywhere for the most part. It's actually people consistently, they're in a more state of confusion by the end than otherwise, and it short circuits kind of the narrative arc for this season as presented, because if we're to map it onto previous seasons of Buffy, you would think that the stuff about Willow having mind wiped Tara, the stuff about Giles wanting to leave, Buffy was in heaven arc, you could see that easily being 3 or 4 more episodes before those revelations come out. And in doing this, it really does, like, it creates an intentionally disjointed sense to the stories for the characters, which allows space for things like the Dark Willow thing to develop in kind of the space created in the back half of the season. So I think it's quite interesting. And
this episode is really fascinating in terms of how it treats Willow, because obviously there's a very clear practical reason as to why Willow is so excluded in this episode in terms of how much she sings or her own contributions.
Which is that
Alison Hannigan requested that she do no singing because she absolutely did not want to. But the effect of it is that you have a character who can't sing her truth because she doesn't have any truth beyond the facade she's putting up. And it kind of belies the darkness to come throughout the rest. It very much puts her in a different category to the rest of the Scoobies. She feels like an outsider, and like she feels like an outsider in this episode. Yeah, it's a very good point, because I do feel that as we progress with Willow at the moment, we lose access and privilege to her inner monologue, because I couldn't tell you really at the moment what Willow thinks is happening, because she doesn't really know what's happening. Whereas the other characters, they say they have their outward thing they're saying and their inner feelings. Willow is starting to become one and the same. What she's claiming is happening is all we're seeing of her. I think even like when we get to the big kind of conclusion of the musical with her running out to kiss Spike, like that is obviously like a specific inversion of, it's not actually a resolution or a positive thing or a catharsis, it's just like a thing to do. And it's genuinely meant, but like it's not the conclusion to a musical, in the sense that, the conclusion to a musical is her going out to kiss Angel. Her going to a musical is not her going to kiss someone who in the final episode of the show she says like, "Oh, I love you," and she says, "No, you don't, but thank you." That's not the structure. Willow's a fascinating character though in lots of ways in this episode. So we see through Tara getting significantly more narrative. In this episode, we get like probably like the high in terms of Willow's story arc in this episode, which is like Under Your Spell, which is the most lesbian thing that had been aired on TV to this date. By far, I'd have to imagine. It is both incredibly affectionate and then extremely sexual.
I think that went entirely over my head when I was younger, to be honest. The fact that they're clearly having sex in this. Like, the whole song is about them wanting to go have sex.
Yes.
And I miss that entirely.
Yeah. So they go have sex, and Willow literally goes, like, there's no visible, like, question mark around it. She goes down on Tara, Tara starts floating then in the air, and she's singing, "You make me complete, you make me complete." It's just like, okay. And that's really incredible. Like, it's genuinely great representation. It's great. I think it's good representation. I think it's groundbreaking for the time. And bizarre that they could get this on TV.
It's also, overall, I know it's like a more sexual episode than usual, because Buffy at one point is like, what else to Spike? What else would I be pumping you for? And just like, not necessarily graphic, but like a lot more on that nose thing. I think it was 3 or 4 or 5 things like that where it was like, oh yeah, the amount of like sexual illusion in Xander and Anya's song where he's like, etc. Your great big warm embrace, etc.
Yeah, I don't think he says great big, but okay. There's also the reference at the end of the episode which I really didn't like, where Xander is like, "You want to make me your queen?" And I was like, oh, anyway. But yes, I think that's that's very much in keeping with the style of the episode, which is to bring you into a space which is like, more tongue-in-cheek and more or less direct in its communication than Buffy usually is, which is fascinating. But Willow in this episode, while that's a beautiful representation, you also have the fact that Tara finds out that Willow did erase her memory in the previous episode. The thing that Mark Field talks about extensively about this episode, he, like, in his book, he refers extensively to that interaction, and, like, kind of a trigger here for sexual assault, and maybe skip a few minutes forward if you don't want to hear about it. But he discusses the suggestion from the Buffy community that Willow in the scene is like raping Tara, essentially, because they have sex while Tara's under the influence of a magical spell, essentially. From my perspective, I think it's like probably not good to draw like rape analogies in situations where, they cannot exist in normal swing of things. I don't think it's what they're trying to communicate in this scene at all. I think it's very much, I think it's probably closer to, lying to someone and having sex with them, which is immoral in so many ways, but not sexual assault, really.
Yeah, like, so we
depending on the situation, but yeah.
Yeah, but we had a lot of conversation with this, because I think it's a really interesting and really fertile kind of point to consider when you're talking about genre TV shows, because when people reflect and analyze genre TV, in my view, they can be selective in where they apply real world standards, real world allegory, and fantasy standards. Now, it's you can't absolve TV shows entirely because they're set in fantastical settings. They can absolutely have dangerous messages, unethical implications, or giving people a pass for things which are objectively terrible. Do you know what I mean? But if we could draw a comparison, you could have in Buffy a situation where a main character could stab another character with a sword, and through legitimate interactions they could get over that and forgive each other and go on normally. If you're to be really literal, if someone was to stab you with a knife in real life, like, that's a much more serious thing, but they're not trying to, and you wouldn't get over that. You wouldn't have that kind of resolution. So there's a certain amount of understanding that the world of the show has to set standards for what is a big action and what's a small action.
Yes.
And I think the analogy you made is perfectly attuned insofar as what she does is definitely having sex with Tara while she has equivalent to lied to her quite significantly,
or manipulate quite significantly.
Manipulated, and yes, you could say that it's analogous to manipulation, to lying, to gaslighting, maybe abusive behavior, but it is not actually equivalent to say drugging her, because that is not what is being conveyed. You know?
I think that's an important thing to, because like I think the writing here is best served by the presumption that what is supposed to be happening here in terms of what it's communicating about Willow Tara's relationship and what it's communicating in terms of Willow's behavior is Willow is willing to lie and deceive, and she is doing that to the person she cares about the most, which is very destructive and very irresponsible. Do I think that they're trying to? Do I think the writing is trying to convey that she's sexually assaulting, Tara? I think that's intentionally misreading the context.
Yeah, and I think like there are some people who might be of the position that in the analogy that we have, if she was lying to her, that is still rape, and that is a position they can have, but they have to start from that point on the Overton window. It's not as easy as saying it's very obviously something. Like for example, by comparison, like in the show, people can people can body swap.
Yep.
People's personalities change depending on whether they have a soul or not. What useful comparison can you draw that to a real life behavior?
Exactly. And there's there's no real use, I think, in that situation to like interpreting it that way. I think the writing is communicating that Willow's being deeply deceitful and manipulative, and has done something that's deeply immoral within the context and constraints of the situation. But I think this situation is not best served by interpreting that way.
Exactly. And conversely, there's no question for me that how Willow behaves as a partner is fundamentally putting not only her own preferences, but really just like her own, like the easiest option for her ahead of like a healthy romantic or sexual relationship with Tara. So like that is enough of an indictment of itself. Yeah.
Agreed. I totally agree. God, we have so much to go through here. And I think experiences. One of my notes here to talk about for this episode is experiences. I think it must have been an experience with musicals.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that Ronald Wilcox in this episode highlights a lot is the idea that self-immolation or spontaneous combustion. So as we know, we've kind of highlighted a couple of times, Joss Whedon's quite a big fan of Dickens, Charles Dickens, 19th century novelist, mostly wrote in the serial format, very much a populist. So he would have written in serial form for newspaper masses, or magazine publications, and he would adapt the story to the responses of the readers. There would often be public readings. So very interesting. Adventure. With all that, do not like Charles Dickens at all. I find him dull as shit. But Bleak House is one of his texts, and it's one that Joss Whedon's a big fan of. And in that, there's loads of spontaneous combustion. And within those, spontaneous combustion often signifies that someone is being self-deceitful and that they are lying to themselves, and they kind of that internal struggle leads to them combusting. And that an equivalent thing will happen sometimes in that story, which I haven't read. To a similar thing will happen to institutions, that when there is deceit internally within that institution, that it will self-combust. So I think that's actually a really great basis on which to understand this episode, in which people who cannot, like when what happens to Buffy before she starts to try to dance herself to death is basically saying, I was in heaven and I have nothing now. And she kind of looks at her friends and considers singing more, and realize there's nothing that she can communicate further, and it's just like, I will dance myself to death in this case. I'll internally just explode because I have no more truth to communicate. I have no more understanding of myself to
and Buffy needs such forward momentum. She needs a focus, and she's utterly unfocused here.
She really is. It's just fascinating how much of this episode is about just like nihilism. It's just not what you expect from a musical. Giles, of course, in this episode, quite an important role. I think the Xander Anya stuff is reasonably self-explanatory. It's all very much building towards Hell's Bells, in which Xander leaves Anya at the altar.
It's interesting because initially in the opening scene where Xander's like, this is unnatural, how do we stop it? I was like, oh, he's just being weird about it. And then quickly I was like, oh, because what's happening is people are kind of spilling their truths, and their song is the one that most feels like they are saying things. For me, it's one that most feels like they're saying things they wish they could stop themselves from saying to each other. Yeah. At
the same time, it's kind of sad because like you can actually hear it in it. All of Xander's things that he's saying are like very condemning of Anya. And all of Anya's stuff she's saying are like kind of self-doubty as well. And they're like, you know, oh, Xander's annoying for these reasons.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, like that's stuff that she already communicates to him.
Yeah.
You know, like
she's more concerned that they won't work out, and he's concerned that he doesn't want to be with her, basically.
Absolutely. And like, I think that's really well communicated by the fact that Anya throughout the episode is quite self-referential or quite referential to the format. She talks about like, you know, would you describe the song that you sang as a book number or a pop
Breakaway
show
pop hit. Breakaway pop hit.
Breakaway pop hit. And she also refers to what is it? She at some point in the episode she calls Xander something that she calls him in the song.
Beady eyes.
Beady eyes. She says that in conversation, which is, I think, she's saying it later on as well?
She says it in a spoke through line in a song, okay. But she does referencing an earlier song basically.
Yeah. But she's referencing an earlier song, which means continuity and a kind of an integration of what's kind of being communicated, whereas Xander like cannot communicate what he's trying to communicate to Anya here, which is that he has extreme doubts about this situation. Giles in this episode, I think, is very clear, and I think probably the musical highlight of the episode is Giles and Tara singing together, where Tara is singing that she's going to have to leave Willow because of what she's done, and Giles singing that he's going to have to leave Buffy because she's relying on him too much to really. Anyway, it's a beautiful little moment. It's musically complex and beautiful, and like a very beautiful harmony and melody.
It's probably the most. I feel it's one of the most musically elevated moments in the episode.
Very important to note. Like Joss Whedon wrote all the music for this episode. It's very high quality. And you know what's not very high quality though?
Joss Whedon.
Joss Whedon's character. Yeah, he's a bad man.
He is. But the funny thing is, like, having listened to this musical out of this soundtrack out of context for so many years, it's interesting to revisit it with the lead up and understanding the character's current state. And one of the things that really struck me was Giles' decision to make Buffy go and deal with the demon by herself is wrong. Like it's an emotional reaction he is having where he's like, God, I need to like push her to do something, but it's like it's fully disproportionate, and I think it is informed by the musical logic. People often do things in musicals which don't really make sense.
It's an emotional truth rather than a practical truth. But they quickly realize, and they're like, oh no, have to go back and go get her.
And a couple of things I was impressed by in the episode is I thought Michelle Trachtenberg did great, and as you pointed out, she's a trained dancer, and I really was like, oh wow, she's really bringing that to bear here. Anya, I thought, had a great set of pipes on her. Emma Caulfield, she was
revelation.
Of all the people who weren't giving a belter number, I could hear that she could do it if they let her free on it a little bit.
Yeah, the moment, of course, that she does kind of get that as Bunnies, where she doesn't really get to stretch her pipes because she's not like it's just shouty rock music. Yeah, but like, you can hear her just like fully like committing in that sound booth to like fully committing to that piece. She's great.
And notably, the demon in this episode, Sweet, is one of the few monsters they fight who wins.
Doesn't get killed.
Yeah, basically does what he wants, more or less, leaves, nothing happens to him.
No, walks away with a bit of an no homo.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like I think the thing about Once More's feeling is that it's both discussed to death and also doesn't need any discussion. It's one of those great episodes of Buffy, which constantly happens, where the viewer experience is so close to the kind of end stage critical interpretation. What it actually delivers, you can kind of inspect how it's done that, but its message can't really be confused. It's a very, very well-spoken, very clear doctrine on where our characters are, what they're experiencing, why they're doing this, the sense of fun, the sense of play. And like, I think what really is notable about the episode is that like a very early stage for the kind of time of television it was in, it shows just what television can be, which is like very cool.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very interesting point, which is musicals don't really have a lot of subtext compared to most genres. It's an art form based around making your feelings exterior. So yeah, I think you're right. I think if you watch this episode, you get a lot of what we will usually try to disinter from the from the episode.
So we can make observations, but we like. I think there are some episodes of Buffy where you can probably like gain more understanding of the episode through listening to an episode of our podcast. You know, I think you can be like, oh yeah, that's actually brought together my understanding of what was happening there, you know, in a useful way. And the best episodes of Buffy we can just comment on, because, you know, I'm not giving you anything about the body that you can't experience far better by sitting down and watching the body.
Yeah, like the best critical theory is experienced rather than discussed. Yeah.
It's beautiful, Joel.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay, Buffy Bits.
Yes.
So people fucking love listing Buffy Bits. Well, people love listing trivia for this episode. So here's some that I got. Okay, David Fury is the person who leads the Mustard song. He's a writer you've referred to many times. Marty Nixon is the woman who's singing about how she can't get a parking ticket.
That's great.
Which is, yes, I totally agree. The actors all spent about 3 months in voice training. Sarah Michelle Gellar reckons she did about 19 hours of vocal training and about 17 hours of dance. It shows off. She's incredible in this episode. I hate how she pronounces things, though. Oh, yeah. She adopts a very common thing when she sings, which is that, like, you know, it's very difficult to enunciate when you're singing. So when you're singing, it's far easier to pronounce vowels than it is consonants. So you end up underpronouncing consonants, and she does that a lot. Her rhotic or drops in and out a huge amount in this episode. So you hear, like, you know, life's a game and we all play a part, you know, stuff like that, and you're like, it's part, you know, and you're North American, you sing it with a rhotic or, and it's very, she just drops in and out of that a lot. You can hear where she's been coached to include it where it's very obvious, but she finds it very difficult, and I find that so hard to listen to. But she does an incredible job in this episode for someone who can't sing.
Yeah, no, I quite like the aspect of this episode which makes it feel like that the Scoobies themselves are singing to a certain degree, rather than they can bring in trained singers to overdub them. Yeah,
absolutely. So this episode was actually nominated for an Emmy for outstanding musical direction, but NATAS, who are the people who, I don't know, send out the nominees for these things, left it off the ballots accidentally. So you could they send out a second postcard to be like, oh, you can write it in if you want, but like, absolute snub. Like, what won instead of this? Very interestingly, when Tara finds out that Willow has erased her memory, she goes and looks up the flower that she used, and it's not a thistle, it's a Leith's bramble, which is a flower of forgetfulness, and it's named for Leith, which is Greek for forgetfulness, and it's one of the, as you pointed out, one of the 5 rivers of Hades from which you drink and can't forget. Yeah. So, and then the last thing I wanted to note.
I wonder if that's etymologically related to lethargic.
Almost certainly.
Yeah.
Well, lethargic doesn't really mean forgetful, though.
No, but there could be like a loss, or yeah,
that's a good point. So my favorite Buffy bit for this episode is that Xander at the beginning of the episode says, respect the cruller and tame the donut, and that is a very clear Magnolia reference in which Tom Cruise's character is giving a self-help segment and says, respect the cock and tame the cunt.
Like a weird pull for this episode, right? Yeah,
and very similar time period. They were referencing P.T. Anderson a lot in Gilmore Girls, and I always found that very out of place. And that's all. I think that's my significant Buffy bits that I found interesting. Do you have any, Joe?
Yeah, so it's from the Greek lethargos, which means forgetful, and somehow has translated to lethargic to mean like.
That's interesting.
Yeah, otherwise I noticed that obviously we have the reference where Buffy says Dawn's in trouble again, must be Tuesday, which is a reference to the day that they were broadcasting the episode on. That I appreciate that she put on her makeup for the fight. Like when she arrives, she has lipstick, she's done up for the dance fight. And that there's like quite a reasonable proliferation of background demons and stuff. Like there's quite a complex horned demon in the opening number, and some exaggerated dusting effects and things like that, which are quite.
We noted Spike like walking forward into a vamp face, and it looked fucking awful.
So they transition his vamp face while he's walking, and it looks nightmarishly. It does, it's a mistake. He looks like an awful mistake.
Yeah.
And the Michael Flatley joke as well, which is who is technically technically Irish.
He isn't. Is he
Well,
Irish
but like
now?
I don't want him. Yeah,
I don't think he's American born. Certainly,
I think Michael Flatley's Irish.
Michael Flatley is American. Thank God, like, because he's a bad person. But Lord of the Dance. If you've never watched it and want to experience what it's like to feel proud of being Irish for once in your fucking life, go watch a video. Go watch on YouTube Lord of the Dance from Eurovision 1994 or something like that. Just put in Eurovision Lord of the Dance. It is one of the most beautiful things you'll ever see.
Okay,
I honestly find it like beautiful.
So he's Irish American. He's born in Chicago, but both his parents were born in Sligo. So like, I think we have to like take
Where does he live?
America.
Yeah, there you go. So born in America, lives in America.
Sure, but like, yeah, we're going into a whole kind of like politics of like, you know, where people are from and that kind of stuff.
Fair enough. Okay, well, no, I don't mean that to apply to any other like people, but just, you know yourself. Americans claiming Irish heritage tend to be super conservative, which is so stupid because Irish history is so fucking rebellious and against like. Anyway,
I think I would give a pass for people whose parents lived in Sligo just before they were born in America. Yeah,
fair enough. Okay, fashion notes. Or do you have any more Buffy bits?
No, I'm happy with that.
Fashion notes. So I thought Xander's haircut was pretty nice for this episode. It was reasonably decent. I hated Anya's butterfly top. It just has a huge butterfly on it and has no back, which was an odd style at the time. Xander's brown leather jacket is about 8 sizes too large in this episode. It looked awful. And I think that maybe this episode is the episode in which Sarah Michelle Gellar looks the most radiant. In the final scene, she just looks so full of life and so beautiful. Her dancing is incredible. I think she just looks wonderful. And then obviously you had a very clear visual moment at the end of the episode where they're all kind of holding hands and getting ready to like walk away in fear or walk away.
Yeah, that bit where they clasp hands, I think that's great. Yeah.
Do you?
Like, it's not actually good, but like I enjoy it. I enjoy the kitsch of it. Yeah.
100%. But they're all wearing very like primary colors. It's been noted that like, you know, it's very likely that the 8 characters there are kind of supposed to communicate the 8 notes of the octave, etc., etc. So, do you have any fashion notes?
Fashion notes, otherwise, no, I think Dawn's dress during her kind of balletic scene is really good. Not quite fashion, but I thought that the kind of demons with the pumpkin heads or mannequin heads were kind of cool. And I note them specifically as fashion because initially I was like, his minions just look like they're humans he's put helmets on. You're like, no, those are meant to actually be their faces. It's like, well, that's horrible.
Yeah.
And I like the way Sweet dresses in this. I think as a demon, he's just like he's a very memorable demon. He could just be a plot device. Dresses well, dances well, conveys a sense of style. And yeah, just the whole kind of Metro Goldwyn Mayer. You know, they really lean on the fact that Sunnydale downtown looks like the set it is by making it look like a Hollywood set and everyone dressing in kind of floral patterns and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
You know what's fascinating about that is that you know what Americans mean when they say downtown?
No.
They mean the city centre.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, I always thought it was like, you know, there was kind of like downtown and uptown was like
that's where all the girls live.
Exactly. It's where the girls live. It is where kind of uptown means, I don't know, kind of more fashionable and more kind of like well-off area of town, but then the other area of town is downtown, which is like kind of like where the slightly more dodgy thing, like kind of similar to north side, south side in Dublin, but no, it's city centre and not city centre.
Okay.
How bizarre is that?
Pretty rich.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have a death count, Joe?
Death count for this episode?
No.
So a few days in this episode, we see 2 vampires theatrically staked by Buffy, 1 beheaded, 1 unidentified demon impaled by Buffy with a sword, ow, and 1 unidentified man who dances himself to death, burned up by Sweet. Okay,
great. And Joel, do you have a rating for me?
Yeah, so I'd probably give this episode 10 out of 10 prehensile demon chins.
Tell me about that.
I think with... there would be the potential to give it less than 10 because it's disadvantaged by the fact that I've seen it so many times, I've listened to it so many times, we know it so well, and so many things have come after that arguably do more than this does. But what I hang my tongue on is the fact that I think it works very well as a musical piece. The music is good. It is still fun to watch despite being an event, and it works as a Buffy episode. It does the three things. You could have gotten away with any one of them, I think, but it does the three things very well. And it's a piece of television history and a piece of Buffy history that I think really tethered me in many ways to the show for a long time. When I waxed and waned between like being a focused fan of it, I was like, yeah, but I really love that episode, and it brings people back, and it brings people in, you know. So yeah, I give it 10 out of 10.
Great. I'm also gonna give it 10 crullers out of 10. Is that what I call it, cruller? Mm-hmm.
Although apparently that's not a cruller he's holding when he says that as well.
Yeah. So it's probably the lightest 10 out of 10 I'll give any Buffy episode. I think it's brilliant. I think it's incredibly well done. I think it's incredibly well put together. It just doesn't do it for me as much as like The Body or Restless or Becoming Part 2 or any of those kind of brilliant kind of moments. Instead, it kind of like, I can see the brilliance. It's just not fully my kind of thing, I think. Same time, like, I mean, so many of the lyrics, so many of the songs will like have dug themselves into my brain. I love the way that this is kind of like really restructures the season going forward. I love how it the kind of how it's a nexus through which the kind of whole show goes through and then comes out the other end of. I think it's a production marvel. I think it's very very prescient of things that will come after it, TV wise. I think it set a standard, and it's a huge achievement. But I probably would, it's very enjoyable. It's very easy to watch it, and it's clearly a masterpiece in so many ways. But like, would I put this on or Hush? Like Hush every time. Yeah, like Hush is better. It's a better 10 out of 10.
Yeah, but they all get to go to the party together. Yeah, the party in the bronze.
Yeah. Okay.
The 5 episodes you meet in heaven.
Okay. The Cordelia chase. Joel, you want me to talk a bit about this? Do you?
Yeah. If you go to like the episode is Offspring. Darla comes back. She's pregnant, and there's just a lot of interactions between, you know, a couple of things. Darla as kind of the pregnant vampire, Cordelia and Angel starting to develop his first romantic feelings for Cordelia, and bringing the vampire hunter Hulks from the past into the present. But yeah, if you want to speak about it a little bit, that'd be...
Yeah, so this is an odd episode. I felt it was like structurally very unusual for this point of the show. So as you said, the big headline is that Darla comes back to Los Angeles. She's pregnant. Everyone finds out. Angel attempts to care for her because it's as a couple of characters highlight, it's his only chance to have a child, essentially, because of whatever's happened here. And he thinks that it's kind of brought Darla back into a more caring space, potentially. However, what happens is that Cordelia, who has been training with Angel, who is kind of getting stronger and who is taking more agency, Angel started to fall in love with her. And and Darla attacks Cordelia, and Angel's forced to choose between the two of them. And of course, chooses Cordelia. And the denouement is that it's communicated that Darla, the reason that she's so disgusted and so at
craving pure blood,
is that she has a being with a soul inside of her. So the baby does actually have a soul because Angel isn't souled.
Because that's how it works.
Yeah, I don't know. You shoot souls into people with your sperm. Like, great.
Okay, Brian.
Okay. Anyway, I found the episode kind of crap. I found the dialogue mushy as like anything. I found the interactions to be so awkward, so forced. I found the development of the relationship between Angel and Cordelia, they have to start somewhere, but like you can't really start anywhere because it's not good.
Yeah. It's kind of like the dialogue, a lot of the dialogue around the baby is like Darla keeps saying things like, come on daddy, put this baby in your baby mama, big old baby inside me. It's like, like no pregnant person or vampire speaks the way you're talking here. It's really like how a pregnant woman who is angry about a talk, kind of 101. Yeah.
Yep. What I did like was that like just the bring Holtz forward. I like Holtz. I like Holt as a storyline. I think it's like scary and weird.
Yeah. Host basically being like a vampire hunter who successfully hunted them for a long period of time, and like is like his grief leaves him with nothing but hatred of these specific vampires. And he's played by an actor whose name I will look up specifically, but it's like Keith Sayerbajan, who is also
it's Keith Sharbashka. Sharbashka?
Who played a significant role in Babylon 5 as well.
Oh, who's he in Babylon 5?
You might not remember, but remember Talia, who was the
of course,
not psychopath, the telepath. Remember her mentor?
Talia is the one who comes back, or the blonde one?
The blonde one.
Okay.
Her mentor.
Okay.
Who she has a weird relationship with, and it's
is he kind of abusive?
There's something along those lines with it as well. Okay. Yeah. So he's quite a good actor. And it's a good storyline, and he gets brought forward to basically hunt them down, you know. But yeah, so like it's an episode that tries to do a lot of work in setting up some plot lines.
Yeah.
But like it doesn't really work as an episode insofar as I was like, I don't really remember specifically what happened in the episode. Like,
I'd agree with
as in, like, there's a number of scenes where people interact, but what the impetus is really unclear, I think.
Yeah, they don't really have much to do in the episode, as in the plot is quite light in the ground. You know, Darla arrives, she's pregnant, she leaves. Yeah. And otherwise in the background, Holtz is being brought forward through time through a spell, kind of. It was a bit of a slog. And I think coming off the strength of Billy and the strength of Once More feeling, it felt kind of quite quite a kind of muddled episode. Not awful. Certainly more enjoyable than a lot of season 2 or 1 of Angel, and it's in no way a body or floating eyes demon episode. But I found it just a little useless. I'm looking forward to the plot taking up a pace again, and like the soon to come stuff of season 3 is all like great.
So we say 5 Feminist Chesters?
I was gonna go for a generous 6, but a 5 I could be persuaded on.
I think I have to go 5, even though I like what a lot of these plot lines come to, but like I didn't like what this episode did for us. Yeah,
no, yeah, me too.
So yeah, I'm gonna give it 5 Feminist Chesters.
Sure, I'll go with 5 as well.
I think that'll bring us to the big closing number here. I was like the climax. What do they call it in
Finale BB?
Finale, yeah, the BB finale.
Oh, Finale BB. Well, Finale B is one of the great cuts from Rent.
From Rent, of course. Yeah, it's a nice pull.
It's the Finale B from Rent is genuinely, if you like Rent and you've never listened to Finale B, of course you have, but it is by far better than the original finale, and it's emotional and sad. I fucking love that. Remember, I quite like the Rent movie. I think it's shit, but it's my kind of shit.
Yeah.
The alternative ending where Angel walks out on stage behind all of the cast, and she touches Colin's hand for a second. It's like, oh, no, not Colin, sorry. What's his name?
Collins, I think. Yeah.
Collins, yeah, okay. And for a second, it's just like, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Oh, I've cried to that.
One of the things I meant when we were talking about musicals, one of my musical stories I wanted to tell was when we were really, really, really into Rent when I was a teenager. One of my friends got me a copy of Anthony Rapp's biography. Anthony Rapp, who is now on Discovery, but was Mark in
and very famously he brought forward allegations about Kevin Spacey, and that was kind of the tipping point for Kevin Spacey being appropriately removed from everything, hopefully
from
ever.
Reality, apparently, just completely Thanos snapped. But no, Anthony Rapp, who is now on Star Trek Discovery, who was, as you say, the person who accused and brought forth the allegations, in a really strange way of putting it, but the person who called out Kevin Spacey for stuff that happened while Anthony Rapp was a teenager. But he wrote a biography around the Rent film time, which I read, and it's a very, very funny memory of mine, because a very earnest man by all descriptions is doing a D&D campaign at the moment with his cast. Lovely person. You
used to have him on PSN, and you used to have him added on PSN, because every so often you'd be playing and you'd be like, oh, Anthony Rapp is playing.
Oh, I think
he's playing Bloodborne right now, and I was like, well, Joel, why? And you're like, well, he put it on his Twitter and I wanted to add him.
Yeah, somehow I did end up friends with him on PSN, but his biography is just about a period in, I want to say it was the 90s.
Was it during Rent?
Losing My Religion, when did that come out?
Oh, that was 91.
So he talks about from going to his audition for Rent up until the film being made, and he sang "Losing My Religion" for his audition
By R.E.M., yeah.
by R.E.M., and it's just, he cries constantly. Like every chapter ends with him crying over something, and there's one where he, because it's the 90s, he like gets into a dark place. Okay, actually, sorry, there's one thing where Andy Dick, who is another
Comedian.
actor who I think actually had become quite insane and has a lot of problematic stuff about him, but he talks about like when him and Andy Dick were teenagers together, giving him like a hand job in the basement of his mother's house and then crying for some reason.
Yeah, whenever you tell the story, I always conflate it with the John Barrowman autobiography, in which he like is upside down giving a blowjob in a tree to someone, right?
Yeah,
someone famous as well. I think
I'll come back to that in a second. John Barrowman one, because that's also musical related, because he was in Springtime for Hitler in The Producers.
Yeah.
But basically every chapter is just tear stained, and then he talks about being in a dark place with his boyfriend and cheating on him by going to an AOL chat room with someone and like wanking online and then crying into his like old laptop. And it's just like it's a style of biography that just would not be made anymore. It was so like cringy. And then the John Barrowman autobiography was just completely like farcical, and he does talk about like various sexual exploits he had, including having sex with his now husband upside down in a tree, like some weird Spider-Man thing. So
bizarre.
A lot of terrible, because of musicals, a lot of terrible books I read being like, these people are stupid in some ways.
Agreed.
So on that note, thank you for giving us your time this week for Once More a Feeling. We're very happy to have you here.
Thank you for giving us our time. Oh yeah.
We hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please let us know. Tell your friends, tell the more capable singers in your life, and we will see you next time on Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys.
Flying through the skies so fancy free. Okay, see you.